If you feel that you've saved a successful amount of money for retirement, I can tell you definitively you have a tax problem. Yes, the reason I can say that with confidence is because it is designed that way by default. Let me show you what I mean. When you first started saving for retirement, it was probably inside of a 401k, right? 401k or an IRA. Now, when you started saving for retirement, was your goal to save as little as possible or as much as you could possibly afford? Probably as much as you could possibly afford, right? In fact, you were incentivized to do so. You were incentivized for getting a tax break in that current year, and in some cases, even an employee match, right? Your employer would put some in your 401k as long as you participated as well. And at that point in time, at 28, 29, 30 years old, however old you were, you thought in your mind you were doing good tax planning with the idea that as you put money in, you get a tax break while you're employed. And in the future, once you're retired, no longer working, no longer earning income, you'll be in a lower tax bracket, and that's when you'll pay the taxes. However, little did you know that you were incubating a tax time bomb. And so now that, 3 decades later, now you're approaching retirement, and for the first time, you are in complete control of your income. So whether you're retiring in your 50s or 60s, right? And if you've saved a successful amount of money and it has grown to a successful balance over the last several decades, you really only need to pull out a little bit here and there to get you through your 60s. But then what happens in your 70s? Required minimum distributions. RMDs. So this is an IRS required minimum distribution where they say, hey, look, we've given you a tax break this entire time. We've let you kick the tax can down the road. Now that your balance has ballooned to a large amount, we want our tax money. Whether you need to take money out or not, we want money. Now, how is money taxed that comes out of 401ks and IRAs and 403bs? As ordinary income, right? The most unfriendly kind. So just like when you were working, right, there's several brackets. And if you have saved a successful amount of money inside of your IRA and 401k and you've been a good steward through your 60s, now you have these massive RMDs that come out on the tax tables. And if it's a large balance, your tax bracket does what? It shoots through the roof. So now you're paying all this ordinary income tax on this money that has never been taxed before. And since this account has grown as much as it has through your 60s, because as you've taken money out just here and there as you've needed it, your investments have continued to balloon. So now you're back up near the top tax rates as ordinary income. But unfortunately, it doesn't end there, because now that you have ordinary income and you're paying ordinary tax rates on that, that triggers capital gains. Now, is capital gains taxable? Yes, the brackets are 0, 15, and 20. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to be in the 0% bracket. However, since we have a certain amount of ordinary income that is being forced upon us, now we are potentially triggering capital gains on everything else in our life. But it doesn't end there, because now that we have all this ordinary income and we've triggered capital gains, what about Social Security? Is Social Security taxed? It's taxable, right? What are the brackets? We have 0, 50, and I hate to even say it, 85%. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to be in the 0% bracket on Social Security tax. In fact, Social Security tax was never meant to be taxed, but over the course of the decades, we've funded wars and Congress has borrowed from it and put IOUs in and said, hey, we'll pay it back, and never did. In fact, right now, for every retiree that is drawing a Social Security benefit, it takes 3 actively employed people in the workforce to fund that one benefit. It should be the other way around, but that's how stressed the system is. So now they're taxing the very money that you've paid into that as they pay it back to you. I talked with a client recently, and she said, it seems like the more I win, the more I lose. And so now I say that every time I do this presentation at dinner events across the country. But unfortunately, we're not done here. There's another tax that gets triggered. So because you're forced to take money out of your IRA and 401k that you've never paid tax on, and you climb the brackets, you pay ordinary income tax, you trigger capital gains, you trigger Social Security. What about Medicare? Do we all pay the same price for Medicare? No. There are 5 different, they call them surcharges, but that's just another word for tax for Medicare. There are 5 different brackets. You may have gotten a letter called IRMA, right? Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. And so if you think you're going to pay the same price you did last year for Medicare, but your required minimum distributions are forcing your ordinary income up, you'll get a letter, and it's always 2 years delayed, saying, hey, guess what? Because you've earned so much money, when really you're forced to, we feel that you can afford to pay more for the same Medicare as your neighbor that's paying less. So now you're paying higher and higher costs for Medicare. What you've seen so far is the IRS is playing chess. And if you don't realize you're playing, you're probably losing the game. Because of one simple action early on, and being a good steward and growing your money as you should, it now triggers ordinary income tax, which triggers all these other taxes. But unfortunately, we're not done there. Because then you die, right? Now, do your beneficiaries have to pay tax on anything that they inherit out of 401ks, IRAs, 403bs? Of course, right? Now, if it's not your spouse, maybe it's the kids. So here's the issue. The kids inherit it, right? The beneficiaries, and they're typically well into adulthood by the time they inherit it, right? So let's say I'm 43, I inherit mom and dad's IRA. Now, I happen to be in my peak earning years when I inherit my parents' IRA. So since I'm in my peak earning years, guess what? I'm already near the top of the ordinary income tax brackets. I'm earning active income, and now I've inherited my parents' tax obligation. Now, I'm thankful for the inheritance, but here's what happens. Since I'm already paying top bracket taxes, I no longer can stretch. Some of you may have heard of what's called a stretch IRA. When you inherit it, you can stretch the required minimum distributions over the course of your lifetime. So if I'm 43, I can potentially stretch my required minimum distributions from the beneficiary IRA for, let's say, the next 40 years. Why that's very helpful is I can take out little pieces at a time, and potentially if my income goes down, I can take a larger amount, but I have the timeline to be able to manage that tax obligation. Well, that changed a few years ago, and it's very, very, very harmful now. We no longer have stretch IRAs available to us, right, as non-spouses, as children, or any other person beside your spouse that inherits this money. It now has to come out of the account within 10 years. Now, the reason why that's very harmful, and the U.S. Treasury, Congress, they knew exactly what they were doing. Here's what happens. When you only have 10 years to take out an account balance worth however much amount of money, when you used to have your entire life, you accelerate the taxes. Here's why. The U.S. Treasury wants their taxes in 10 years, so they get their taxes a lot sooner than waiting your entire life. Additionally, since you have to take out more per year to get it all done in 10 years, your bracket goes through the roof. So the U.S. Treasury and Congress, IRS, they know exactly what they're doing by shortening that timeline for beneficiaries, okay? In fact, this happened in my very own family. This isn't just pie-in-the-sky numbers and hypothetical things. This is every day. My 94-year-old Aunt Sophia, she lives with me now. She helped me out early on in life, and so I was talking to her recently. I said, Aunt Sophia, how about you come move in? We have plenty of rooms, right? You can enjoy the nice weather here in Las Vegas, and it'll be great. No rent, I won't charge you anything. And the other day I said, Aunt Sophia, can we talk about money for a moment? And she said, yeah, sure, Ken, you're a financial advisor. And I said, well, first, I'd like to just start off by saying, I hope you spend all your money on yourself and in your life. I don't want or need any of it. And she said, well, thanks, Ken, I had every intention of doing so. And she said, no, but I did want to leave you something. And I said, well, Aunt Sophia, see, that's my exact concern. See, because most of your money is in your IRA. And right now at 94, you're in the 12% tax bracket. You've spent all your money down over the course of time, paid all those taxes, and now you're in the 12% tax bracket. And so every dollar you take out is fairly friendly. But if I was to inherit it as a non-spouse, I'm already at the top of the bracket, so all of my inheritance that I get from you comes out taxed at the top rate at 36%. So by leaving me a portion or all of your IRA, you have just tripled the amount of beneficiary funds that goes to the US Treasury from 12% to 36%. And she said, well, I don't want to do that. And I said, I don't want you to do that either. And she said, well, what can I do? And I said, well, one, you could spend it, right? Or you could do what a lot of people are doing. It's called a Roth conversion. And so a Roth conversion, that's conversion, is simply the opposite of a traditional IRA. So traditional IRA or traditional 401k, you don't pay any tax on the seed. You're allowed to grow it tax-free, and then the harvest comes out taxable. Whereas a Roth IRA, you pay tax on the seed and enjoy the harvest tax-free. So what we're doing is we're taking 401k and IRA money, paying tax on it in the current year, and putting it directly into a tax-free account. Now, the reason why that's advantageous at the time of this video is because federal tax rates are at historic lows, believe it or not. A lot of people hate paying taxes at where they're at now, but they are at historic lows roughly over the last 100 years. In fact, over the last 100 years, they have been more than double of what they are right now. So the issue is, if you think you're going to pay a lot of taxes now on your 7-figure IRA, just wait until the future, because debt is at an all-time high, taxes are at an all-time low. So you can obviously see the mismatch there. And so Congress has already rated Social Security. Medicare is already unaffordable for the government to continually subsidize. And capital gains are also very low as well. So you can kind of see the writing on the wall why this might be important. Now, doing a Roth conversion means you'll pay taxes at the current rates over the next several years. But then what happens? You'll have no required minimum distributions. Those are completely eliminated. So guess what? That eliminates ordinary income tax. And since you don't have any ordinary income tax, that gets rid of all or most of capital gains, all or most of Social Security tax, no more Medicare tax, right? So by taking care of the root of the issue, you eliminate all these downstream taxes. That's called a Roth conversion. Now, there's several different traps that you can fall into when you do a Roth conversion. I've written a few articles about it that have been featured in, I believe, Kiplinger or Bloomberg, one of the two. So it's very important that if you decide to do a Roth conversion, you work with a licensed and certified public accountant, CPA, as well as a licensed financial advisor like myself that specializes in retirement distribution planning. Now, to be fair, in all honesty, Roth conversions are not the only strategy, right? You could do several things. You could do what's called a QCD. A QCD stands for Qualified Charitable Distribution. What this is if you're already giving to a church or charity, right, animal shelter, food bank, whatever it may be, you can use part or all of your RMD, depending on the amount, and as long as it goes directly to the qualified charitable organization, that will qualify. It'll satisfy the required minimum distributions. It will not be taxable income to you, and your church or charity gets the money as you intended. So it's a win-win-win. However, that's not money that you'll be able to receive in your pocket and spend. Again, in all fairness, you could do another thing called a donor advised fund. If you have highly appreciated assets outside of retirement accounts, you could do what's called a donor advised fund. I'll show you one more. I have a lot of clients from California. California is a heavily taxed state. And so we have a lot of people moving over from California to set up residency here in Las Vegas or Nevada in general. And one thing that we just did, in fact, just a couple months ago, we'll call her Carol. Carol moved from California. She is a widow, and she was a teacher for the longest time. So she has a massive teacher's pension. She has her Social Security as well as some rental income. And so as far as her spending needs go, she's completely satisfied. Well, Carol has $1 million IRA. And I said, Carol, you know, at 71, you're a few years away from required minimum distributions, and we need to do some planning on what you want to do with this $1 million IRA. It's going to continue to grow, and in a few years, you're going to be forced to take a significant amount of income, whether you need that or not. And she she told me, hey, Ken, I don't need anything from this. I just want it to go to my son. In fact, I want to maximize all the money that will go to my adult son. He's still living in California. He works in the tech sector, actually. So he's a high earner, which we'll get to in a moment. And I said, well, that's great, Carol, but regardless, you have to take required minimum distributions, right, if we don't convert this into a Roth. And she said, that's fine. When I pass, I'll just leave my son the remainder. And since we have that $1 million invested appropriately for long-term growth and income, and it's well diversified, it'll continually perform over the course of time. So upon her passing, even if she's taking required minimum distributions, it will likely still be nearly $1 million that her son will inherit. Here's the issue. Him being a California resident, he may see out of the $1 million, right, after federal tax, state tax, all those types of things, maybe $550,000, right? Again, that's just a guess. $550,000 out of $1 million. So I said, Carol, do you realize that he'll receive maybe half of what you intend him to receive? And she knew that he would have to pay tax on it, but she just said she had never really seen the numbers firsthand like that of what he may incur. Because he's well into adulthood, he's already a high earner, so every dollar that he inherits is going to come out on the top of the tax tables, right? Because his income has filled him up all the way to the top bracket. And I said, well, $550K is better than nothing, of course, that's great, but what if I told you we could triple this after tax? Would that be of interest to you? And she said, well, yes, of course, I want as much money as possible to go to my son. I said, okay, here we go. So Carol, we have to take required minimum distributions out of this $1 million regardless, right? Can't get around it. We can either convert it or we have to take it. Now, if we take it, and if you truly don't need it, what we can do is fund a $1 million life insurance policy. Every year we'll pay it on an annual basis with the required minimum distributions. Now, does Carol need life insurance in the traditional sense? No, of course not, right? She has no little kids at home or a surviving spouse that financially relies on her. So we're using life insurance as a tax tool or an estate planning tool, if you will. And so every year now, we fund this $1 million life insurance policy, permanent policy that will last her entire lifetime. And upon her passing, now her son will not only get the $1 million account, because it will have continually grown, right, which he'll receive $550,000, but now he'll receive $1 million from life insurance. Now, how is life insurance proceeds taxed? Zero, right? It's not taxed. So rather than him getting $550,000 from this original seed money here, he's now going to receive after tax $1.55 million. So just with that one strategy, we have tripled the amount of after-tax money that her son will receive. Again, I'm not saying that's right for you. I'm not saying any of these strategies are right for you. I'm just saying these are the strategies that a lot of people across the country are seriously considering and implementing over the course of time to eliminate the IRS from their retirement. Now, this is just one slice of the overall pie that we do for clients when we begin to work with them to and through retirement. This is just the tax side. There's many other things that we could discuss in future videos, but I wanted to show you several ways that people are strategizing and implementing to eliminate the IRS, not only from their retirement, but from their inheritance. So with that being said, if you're interested in discussing this one-on-one, you can book a complimentary call with us, video call, or if you're in the Las Vegas area, we would love to see you here at our headquarters. Click the link in the video description below and you'll get all sorts of resources.